Innate helps companies avoid project surprises, make better informed decisions, share knowledge, and deliver better outcomes. Innate, transforming the way the world builds.
Hello, project people. Welcome back to a brand new episode of the Project Chatter podcast. It's always great to have you with us. And it's good to have Dale back from the EVA event. How are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm very good. Thank you. Yeah, EVA was fantastic. Big shout out to Mr. Steve Wake and
Well done,
all
Steve.
of the presenters at EVA 27. It was, again, hugely thought-provoking. And yeah, we managed to spend some time with some of the presenters as well. So we'll release that episode in due course, folks. So look out for that. But yeah, how are you, Val?
I'm good, mate. I'm actually looking forward to seeing that. I saw some clips on LinkedIn. Looks very cool. Very cool venue as well.
Yeah, the Armourers Hall. If you've not been, it is, wow. I don't know if I've ever been in a place like that before. There's armor everywhere. There's plaques on the wall that date back to like the 1600s with names on. I was like, wow, this is, nothing as historic as the UK, I don't think.
That fits Steve Wake perfectly as well, I think. Thanks, Steve. We'll catch up soon. And look, let's introduce our guest, Dr. Yakubu Olawale. How are you, sir?
I'm very well, thank you.
I can't believe I got that right. Oh, such a good day.
Absolutely spot on.
This is going to be a great show. I can tell already. So, like, Mr. Kubi, this is an interesting conversation, and obviously you've got some literature out there on this subject matter. Project controls is a favorite playground of Dale and I's as well, and probably some of our listeners. Inhibitors is an interesting word as well, because I've used it in the past, and I guess they're not necessarily a definition. Hopefully people on the call and listening can understand what an inhibitor is. Something that slows us down, right? But do you have something that specifically you state in the book that calls an inhibitor out loud?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just to kind of provide some context, I think I was the word inhibitor came out during my doctorate. I was kind of researching, trying to develop an effective project control model. And I was doing lots of research, as you do with a doctorate, trying to kind of understand what's been done previously. And I was quite taken aback by the fact that majority of what's been done actually relates to factors causing, cost overrun, factors. There wasn't anything about the kind of practice of project control. There wasn't much about practice of project control in terms of how do practitioners actually, deliver project controls in the industry. It was all about the theoretical factors and things like that. And I came up with a word that I think, rather than kind of look at factors that causes cost overrun, why not look at things that actually stop you from actually implementing effective project controls in the workplace? So inhibitors are basically things that actually affect you from delivering project controls, irrespective of how skilled you may be, how good your techniques are, how up to date or state of the art your tools and software packages are. Those inhibitors will absolutely stop you from achieving your dream of delivering projects successfully. So that's what inhibitors are.
Yeah, that's great. And would the opposite of an inhibitor be something like an enabler? Is that the best word to describe it?
Yeah, absolutely. So that would be an enabler. So in my book, at the end of the book, I actually kind of moved on to kind of what are the kind of enabler to an effective, setting up an effective project control practice or process within an organization. So I kind of detail some of the enablers, but we've got the enablers. We all know what you need to do, but you really think about what actually stops you as a project, as an organization, or as an experienced professional from actually implementing effective project controls.
Yeah, and I always wonder, because obviously doing a doctorate in something big like that, and then researching for a book on a subject like project controls, was it hard to find, empirical data, real information because there are these, I mean, the internet's been a lovely gift and a curse in the same sense that you've got this freedom of information flowing all through the world, but how much of it is actually real value or real representations of project performance? Is that, how did you sift through that information and get to kind of the truth?
Yeah, great question. I had always been in project control. I think just kind of to provide some context, I was first introduced to project controls in the late 90s, I think, mid-late 90s, as part of my undergraduate degree. I did a course, a module on project planning and control, and I immediately fell in love with this area of project control. Or this area of project management. That's when I was interested in everything to do with it. I kind of loved it. Then the next year, when I was trying to kind of submit a proposal for my final year project, I submitted something I wanted to do, but it wasn't approved on the basis that it was too complex for an undergraduate dissertation. That it's more of a kind of doctorate dissertation. And guess what? I used that topic, developed a research proposal, and after I completed my undergraduate, it was a topic on project controls that I eventually did for my PhD. To kind of answer your question, I've been in project controls since then, since the 2000s. I've been kind of working on projects, working on project management, working in project management, delivering projects, managing projects as a consultant, and actually as a project manager on site. So my thinking was I wanted to go beyond just kind of looking at empirical data in terms of what's been published. That's absolutely right, is important for a PhD, but I wanted to kind of get into the practice of practitioners out there. So my PhD was very practical. It involved kind of engaging with the top 250 construction project organizations and consultancies in the UK. So actually kind of went to the offices, to the professionals, interview them, engage them, try to kind of understand how they were implementing project controls, what were their challenges, what were their problems. So I relied on the kind of literature, the internet, to get an understanding of what project control is. But in terms of kind of delving deep into the challenges and the problems, I actually called it a kind of practice-informed doctorate. I got engaged with organizations in the UK, and I was actually working as well. So I wasn't just sat in the university kind of doing a doctorate, and I was actually a consultant at Capital Simons then, working on some of the high-profile projects in the UK. So I was working and researching as well. So it was a good blend. So that's an example of how I kind of brought and found information that kind of informed my research and my book.
You don't look that old, man. I mean, when you said you were doing this in the 90s, I was like, wasn't that when the internet was really just starting out probably? And I was like, this guy, he's been around. So it sounds like you've been doing this for a very long time. Very long time.
But like, so, I've been in project controls for 24, 23 years, being
amazing,
researching, working, So I've published as well in lots of leading international journals, like International Journal of Project Management, management in engineering on the topic. So it's my passion area. Yeah.
Well, we can tell when you talk about it. We have to get you hooked up with Steve Wake as well. It would be great to get Yakubu at the EVA in the next event next year, perhaps. Look, it's great to hear where it came from and how you kind of researched it. And obviously the articles are still getting published now. I think mostly from Oxford, a guy called Ben Flivberg. You've probably seen some of his published articles. Yeah. And it seems the conversation, and correct me if I'm wrong, is pushing towards biases in projects. So it's really around how we think naturally as humans, right? There is always biases when we work, and how that's affecting decision management and other areas. Was that the same kind of inhibitors or part of your inhibitors research back then? Is it the same, or is it shifting slowly as projects kind of evolve?
Yeah, I think it's been informed by biases. I think biases is one of is an inhibitor. So it's not a whole inhibitor. So my research is basically in terms of when I speak about inhibitors, the whole concept is about the fact that projects do not operate in a closed environment. We all know that projects are influenced by exogenous factors, factors from the economy, interest rates, inflation, materials, and things like that. At the same time, projects are influenced by endogenous factors as well. Those are kind of factors internal to an to a project. It could be things to do with, unskilled project manager. It could be lack of the proper tools. And my research is, you need to go beyond thinking about the external factors or things that kind of affect projects. You need to think about the environment where you're actually doing your control. So just like project controls are actually influenced by the environment as well. Project controls is not just about the software packages you use. Some people absolutely think, project controls is just, using Gantt charts. I did find some of that a bit strange, using Gantt chart or using using P6 or things like that. But project control goes beyond the software packages you use. It goes beyond the kind of the techniques, like the end values of this world. Project controls consists of the tools, the technique, the environment in terms of the organizational environment, the culture of the organization. It also involves things like the practices. How do you actually deploy some of these tools? How do you, what's your view or the view of the organization in relation to how they report, in relation to kind of how they analyze, in relation to how they act when they find that a project is deviating from plan or going off track. So that's what is called a project controls environment. And in order to manage a project successfully, if you don't understand what are the inhibitors within your organization or within your project, you fight in a lost cause right from the start. So you need to be able to kind of identify your organization, identify your project, and be able to sieve out from past experience or from the type of project you're delivering, what are the things that could actually affect you negatively from actually implementing effective project controls. So that's so. And from my research and from my experience, bias is actually one of those things. I think Fleabag did this optimism bias, which came out as inaccurate estimates. As project managers, or project professionals, we are naturally optimistic. When we kind of trying to kind of estimate, how long something is going to take, we feel we can deliver it quickly. And sometimes it might be a client that wants to get to the market quicker in order to launch a product or launch a program. So naturally, we've got this optimism bias in estimates. That's one of the kind of one of the top 5 project controls inhibitors.
Yeah. I mean, inhibitors is an interesting word because I think it really does generate what would be a picture in people's minds, because sometimes what we do as controls or project professionals is we have to influence. And I think sometimes we're already got our hands behind our backs when we start projects. So we talk about inhibitors. Sometimes I think the problem is we have fixed mind or mental states about how you deliver a project. If you think about when we set a contract or when we bid for a project, and then the bid goes through a BAFO stage, best and final offer, then we strip it down because it's not about delivering the project to the best of our ability and understanding technically. It's about winning the project. That's a different concept. So the incentive is different. And then I think, as you said, like if there is an economy around a project, because it's not a closed state, then we don't have economists, for example, on projects. So then why do we have a fixed closed mental attitude when we start a project? Because we always ask, or at least the client asks, for a total contract value for a clean end-to-end program of delivery works. But we know there's factors that are going to influence that project. So we're almost like starting with inhibitors. And I think the value would be that project controls starts earlier in the phase, or someone represents project controls earlier in the bid or earlier in the stage to enable that or enact a project that can be influenced by open situations, such as, materials is a big example where the fluctuation of material costs globally are going to have an impact on material costs here, and particularly in Australia at the moment. It's a big deal. So how do we change? Maybe, is there suggestions around how we change that closed mindset from the onset? Is it something that the client needs to evolve, or is it something that we need to do wider than that?
It should involve both clients and the project professionals, but in terms of kind of changing the culture or the attitude in the industry, it should be driven by project professionals, because at the end of the day, we are the professionals. Obviously, we all like informed clients, but we need to kind of inform our clients. So one of the suggestions I usually make is, if a client is kind of presenting you with something that's not achievable, or is rushing you, you need to be brave as a project professional. For example, if you're delivering a project internally, you need to kind of be brave to the management, to the leadership, to say, this can be achieved because of these reasons, and you need to kind of put forward a constructive idea of how that's going to be mitigated or resolved. But you need to say rather than kind of accept it. And for corporate organizations as well, you need to don't just accept everything the client does. You need to kind of work hand in hand with your clients and be able to kind of advise them, and and be able to challenge them, and inform them to say, this is going to be, you're going to go back and regret it. You're going to be spending more if you're going to rush this. And we all know about all these projects. Most projects, if it's rushed, you all come back, you spend more because there will be delays. If you've not completed the design, for example, you come back and redesign it. It's always very messy at the end of the day. So you need to kind of provide these examples to your clients. And to your point about the fact that we haven't got economists on projects, and we all kind of start with a kind of closed mind that, this is the budget, this is the time, and we've got to deliver it. I think that's the number one. Change management and change control. Change management, change control, design changes, came up, as the top project control inhibitor. So it's very interesting that you actually mentioned that, if you haven't got, a kind of robust change management, change control process in place, there's no way you will be able to control a project, because number one, there will be lots of changes. Number two, which will affect the time to deliver a project, which will affect, ultimately the cost, because obviously we say time is money most times. So it will affect the time, it will affect the cost, it will affect the scope. And so you need to be able, at the outset of the project, you need to set up, a robust change management process, so that if something changes, for example, that you shouldn't have a fixed or closed system. There should be a robust way agreed by all the parties for you to be able to implement, real change on a project. There will be changes to the economy. For example, we all know what's going on in the financial markets and things like that. So there will be changes in the economy. There will be changes in terms of inflation, in terms of microeconomic issues sometimes that would demand that you change your project, or you increase in size, or you limit your scope and things like that. But as long as you've got an effective and robust change control process in place, you should be able to deal with that. And one of the things I kind of find that causes kind of issues on project is in relation to whether something is a design change or something is a design development. There's this, I'm sure you've come across this, whether it's actually a change or it's not a change, it's a development. If you haven't got a format or a robust change control process that kind of describes what's a change, what's a design change, what's a development, there will always be this tension within your project that will always impact your cost. And the challenge is there will be lots of changes of things that will not be agreed. you just kind of pack them aside and you try to agree them later on, which will always lead to dispute, add additional cost to the project, additional time. So change control and is a big inhibitor to effective control.
No, that's good. And before we move away from biases and get Dale in here, because I know he's very keen to get involved. One of my favorite ones, Yakubu, is the uniqueness bias. And I think one of the challenges I've seen from an inhibitor's perspective is that we all think we're special, which is great. I get it. We are, especially Dale, he's very special. So I think for projects to always think that they're non-standard means that we can never have a level of standardization, which in itself is an inhibitor. If you look at some of the great industries that have really honed in, like the manufacturing or production lines, when they talk about productivity, speed, and inhibitors, if you think of a production line, you look at things like Simon White's great theory of constraint, right? So what slows the belt down, what speeds the belt up? And that is a physical view, and you can understand that, and everyone can get a view of that. And so interesting things come out of doing things repetitively the same way over and over. You see the signal, you see the noise, and you understand exactly where things are slowing that belt down. It could be skills, it could be a labor thing, it could be the way it's configured, it could be the volume, it could be X, Y, Z. I love the idea of that, but we have not, I think personally, and in my humble opinion, found a static standard way to deliver particularly mega projects, which seem to be the common norm now. billion-dollar projects, very ambitious, never done them before, or we're doing them again, but a different way. So there are so many unknowns, and therefore we are using uniqueness as a way to divert ourselves from doing anything standard. And that affects everybody, I think, in the same approach. Is that your understanding as well, Yakubu?
Yeah, I think I'm sure you've, I'm sure if we've, for many people that have kind of done a course or a degree in project management, I think one of the first definition of project is, a project is a unique undertaking. I think that's a PMI definition, or, is a unique undertaking, deliver a specific time and to a budget. So in the definition of project itself, the uniqueness aspect actually comes into it. I do agree, projects are unique undertakings. Project, no one project is the same because, for example, the location, the design, the client, there are lots of variables, but that's about the project. We could say the same of a product, in the manufacturing sector. Obviously, you've got lots of things that are manufactured in bulk, but most of them are, some of them might be unique in their own little way. But for projects, even though the product may be unique, but the whole process, surrounding how we actually deliver this thing is actually the same. So we need to kind of think beyond the product itself to look at how we can actually standardize, the processes surrounding how we actually go about delivering that product, and that's where we need to be as professionals. So for example, how do you plan your project? You could have, you could have different hierarchy. How do you plan a complex project or a medium-sized project, or a small project, within an organization? You could do that, and you could kind of standardize the process and the governance approach you want to take as an organization. There is no one cap fits all, but we should try and, adapt and be efficient in the way that we deliver a project. I think that's one of the recommendations of the kind of Egan report and the UK in 1994. We need to be more efficient, and we need to try and bring some of the learning, and practices of, the manufacturing industry, other industries that are more efficient, or construction and, projects are still very kind of inefficient in delivering projects. So we need to kind of standardize the way we approach things, and the way we should go about that is standardizing the processes, surrounding the product we deliver.
Yeah, no, that's great. I was going to ask you as well, have we, just as an observation since 1994, have we got more efficient in projects, or are we still battling with that?
I think in my opinion, I think we are developing. I think we are improving. I think we've gone beyond looking at the actual tactical and operational delivery of projects, looking at how we actually deliver maybe an IT project in terms of the implementation, or a construction project, how we deliver on site. We're actually looking at, those those are relatively kind of straightforward, and they don't usually take time. The bit that actually take time is the kind of pre-implementation aspect of it, in terms of what happens before we actually start delivering the project. And I think, so for example, in construction and infrastructure, we're looking at the kind of procurement routes. How can we shorten the procurement approach that takes a lot of time? So I think in terms of efficiency, there are lots of kind of different procurement approaches that are currently being considered that can kind of shorten the time you actually get to actually implementing. I wouldn't say we've moved much, quite a lot, but we've certainly made some progress since those days of the 90s. Yeah.
That's great to hear, Yakubu. Progress is great. Val's making progress. He never compliments me, but you're special too, Val. So thanks for that. But when you're asking Yakubu around BAFOs and, drew me to sort of contracts and sort of the inhibitors and the closed mindset thinking. And I think that's partly to do with the way our commercial structures are, our contracts are set up. And I spoke to Steve Wake at the end of the conference today, because, he's setting the standards for benefits management.
Yeah.
And one of the topics that came up was around how we get better at perhaps measuring and managing benefits in similar ways we do the Iron Triangle during, the in-flight projects. And it's interesting because it's a really tough nut to crack, but my offering, and I don't think I've got the answer, but if we can find a way that every single stakeholder in the supply chain reaps reward when the benefits are realized, I think you'll start seeing that every single person in the supply or organization in the supply chain will start measuring and monitoring it. Because if the outcome is beneficial commercially, because let's face it, we're not going to get away from capitalism, right? So how do we marry the two? Because to your point, Val, if you think of the current structure, right? You have the end client and they take a scope of work and they go, I want that delivered by you, contractor. And then there's another scope of work and you contract. Maybe there's a couple of contractors and the contractors have subcontractors and they all, contract out work, pieces of scope. But then the environmental factors, the economical factors happen, and it doesn't impact anyone because their scope's defined. It impacts the end client. And they don't always have a mechanism to pass on these external factors and the knock-on effects down that supply chain because it's not constructed that way. And so perhaps if we can find a way to change the way in which we have project teams, and when I say project teams, I mean the full collective of the supply chain, perhaps we can start cracking the nut, not only on benefits management realization, but maybe delivering projects faster, cheaper, with less of a carbon footprint, all of the above. So maybe something to ponder there.
Yeah.
Did you want to comment on that first, Yakubu?
Yeah, absolutely. I do agree. I think I covered benefit management as one of the penultimate chapter in my book, because there's a link between project controls and benefit management and benefit realization, because project control, one of the objectives of project control, as I kind of argued, is to protect. You need to be able to control the project effectively to realize the objectives, to prevent erosion of margins and profits in order to protect the benefits. So if you want to realize the benefit eventually, you need to be able to control your project effectively right from the outset. And I think you're touching on a great point there, which I kind of touched on in my book as well, which is about the fact that, benefit management and project success, we are always true now. That kind of goes with some of my thinking, that you need to kind of be open-minded about thinking of projects as just a project with a kind of restricted stakeholder in terms of maybe the project manager, the organization immediately affected by the project, or some immediate stakeholders. You need to think of, you should have a multi-stakeholder view of project success. So you should have there's a multi-stakeholder view of project success, and there's a multi-dimensional view of project success. So by multi-stakeholder view of project success, I argue that, you should have what we traditionally traditionally known as project management success factors. So this is the classic iron triangle. This is kind of the measure of delivering your project on time, on budget, to the quality. But that's just one bit of it, because the project, a project actually goes beyond just delivering the product. You should have the other stakeholders involved. You should have like a project ownership success, which is okay, you deliver this product, you deliver this project, it goes further down the chain. What are the how can you realize the target benefits that the project is actually meant to deliver? You should be able to measure this as well. Then you need to go beyond that. You need to go to, to project investment success factors. So you should be able to measure the success of a project based on the investment of the project. The investment is generated, the funders, for example, are they actually achieving their success measures in terms of the return on investment they've done? So that's an example of having a multi-stakeholder view of project success measurement. Then there's the multi-dimensional view as well, which is basically where you look at the kind of impact on the customers. Is this project actually meeting the functional requirements? Is it meeting the technical requirements? Then we've got the business success measurement and the supply chain success measurement as well. So has it contributed to efficiency of operations? So that's where your benefits management and benefit realization come in. You need to be able to measure your commercial success. Has it improved your margin? Has it increased your revenue based on what you actually, so we should go beyond just looking at the short-term, success measures of a project. And finally, you should have a future view of the project as well. So for example, has this project enabled you to achieve your long-term goal or strategy as an organization? Have you implemented this project in order to achieve market entry, for example? Are you going to achieve that? So we should have a multi-dimensional and a wholesome look in terms of how we review project success measures in relation to benefits as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and well put there. If I rewind a little bit, let's put the topic under a microscope. What is project controls in your own words? Not the Google or the APM or the PMI. In your view, what is project controls?
Once again, my thinking, I don't see things as one unique way of defining things. I've got different definitions of project control. How much time have we got?
Look, we've had plenty, so yeah, you can add to them.
Yeah. So let's just on a more serious basis. So I've got project control at the most simplistic level. Is the process of assessing where your project is in relation to its key objectives, and acting to bring your project back on track if required. Mm-hmm. However, this is the most simplistic, definition of project controls. This definition has got many words that needs to be unpacked, in order to truly explain what project control is. So, for example, what do you assess? How do you assess whatever you are assessing? What objective are you assessing against? How do you act to bring a project back on track? And how do you implement your actions? So to answer these questions, you need to get into what I've called the operational definition of project controls. So operationally, define project control as the process that is implemented on a project that involves a 4-step process. The first process is you need to set performance standards for the project. Is the process of initially setting performance standards on the project, which is a very important step of project control, because this is where targets are set for the project in relation to what are the time targets, what are the cost target, what are the technical specification target, what are the resources target, and so on. So this is the first stage, and this would usually be done during the planning stage of a project, where you will set your objectives. So the second step of project control is what we call performance measurement, whereby you measure the actual performance of each activity or each work package of a project, against what is actually happening. Then once you've measured that, you move on to the test stage, which is basically analysis, which is basically where you compare the actual performance standard or the result against the standard you've set at the first stage. So this is basically, and you don't just analyze. So in my book and research, I did find that most people actually stopped at comparison, where they just compare. You need to kind of analyze as well. You need to look for trends. You need to try and forecast where you're going to be based on the current trajectory of your project. So it should go beyond just comparing. You need to do some robust analysis as part of that control. And the fourth stage is the ability to kind of take corrective action on a project. And this is absolutely the most important stage of project control. It's all good you trying to set performance standards, trying to measure, trying to analyze. Ultimately, you need to be able to act, because if you find that your project is going off track or is not achieving or is deviating from your plan, you need to be able to take corrective action on your project in order to kind of bring your project back on track. And if you don't act, then you haven't done any control, despite everything you've done in the first few steps. So that's the kind of operational definition of project control. But I go beyond this to say, the two definitions, I've called them tactical definitions of project control. Those are kind of very tactical in terms of what you do. I argue that project control should actually be more strategic for an organization. So there's a strategic definition of project control. So which is basically the application of, management, technical processes and measures to projects, which allows an organization. So you should look beyond your project. It should be an organization, the leadership of the organization. So it's the application of management, technical processes and measures to a project that allows the early identification, management, and mitigation of project challenges. It's not just about cost, time, risk. It should be any challenges that kind of comes to a project, and risk. So project control is actually about management of risk to a project. It should, so that the project strategic objectives. So you need to look at, okay, what is this project actually giving me as an organization? So that the strategic objectives of a project can be achieved and reduce the chances of a project, failing, in order for the project to be able to contribute, to the organization's strategic objectives. So that's kind of my kind of hierarchy of kind of definition of project control. The simplistic way view of it, then there's the operational aspect. Those two are basically tactical definitions. Then we've got the kind of more strategic approach, whereby organizations will set up their own PMOs, their own governance offices or controls offices. And the whole aim of project control is to allow the visibility of project challenges to management so that they can act and bring a project back on track.
Yeah, so that's hugely interesting and insightful, because you went into a lot of detail there. And I think for the most part, we accept that controls has various levels in an organization, in a project, in a program, a portfolio, more strategic level. I guess if I had to offer up a bit more to it, I think for me, controls is about taking a data-focused view on assuring the success criteria at the level you're operating. So if that's for the organization, if that's for the program, if that's for the project, it's how can you be that first line of assurance?
Yeah.
And what measures do you have in place to inform you and make proper, meaningful decisions, or the right decisions based on the information, the data that you have. And I was going to go next to, well, how do we know we're effective, right? Because it's hugely difficult to show the value of controls, But let's just hold on that one, because you mentioned something there. You mentioned controls and PMO in the same sentence. Is it the same thing?
No, it's not. It's not the same thing. But you've got to be able to see you've got to be able to see your controls or your controls knowledge area within an organization. I kind of review governance controls of lots of organizations, and sometimes their project controls are located within the PMO, sometimes they are within finance, sometimes they are within the risk area. It basically depends on the organizational structure. Ultimately, you've got to work with a structure that works for you as an organization. But what I find with most organizations is, especially organizations that are not project-centric organizations, is that they've kind of evolved over the years, they've developed over the years, and project management and project controls is just one little bit of what they do, and they just basically append it or to
box ticking exercise. We've got a project controls function, so we're good.
And that's it. It doesn't work like that. You should have a dedicated, thinking about how you're gonna set your project controls, because project control, we all say project controls do all sorts, but they basically rely on other functions within the organization in order to perform their role. They rely on the planning function, they rely on finance, they rely on resourcing in order to the HR in order to get resourcing information, so they rely on delivery, in order to get, so project, they kind of interact with lots of many functions within an organization. So you need to be able to kind of plan where you're going to sit your project controls. It could be the PMO or whichever works for you as an organization.
Interesting. And you know what? We use it all the time when we just chatting in day to day. It depends, right? It does depend on the context of the situation. Just one more, and I mentioned it before we sort of went into the differences between PMO and controls there. But what does good look like? How do you know you're being effective? Because if we can measure effectiveness, surely we can show value of project controls, but it's something we've been struggling to show the value of. How do you know that your controls function capability is actually adding value? How do you know it's effective?
That's a very good question. I think it's about, and it's one of those things, you've got to be able to, sometimes, you can't actually quantify it, because, if you deliver a project, it's all right to say, you deliver a project and none of your projects kind of overrun, or none of your projects, overrun cost or time. But it's not always as easy as that. In terms of the way you kind of measure effectiveness is how you are growing as an organization. So in order to measure your effectiveness, you need to start from a basis. You need to know where you are as an organization, and you need to know how you are improving as an organization. So, you need to understand your maturity as an organization. Okay, measure your maturity level right at the start, in terms of, are you at a basic level, or are you developing as an organization, or are you at an optimized level? We've got lots of maturity capability frameworks that allow you to kind of measure your maturity as an organization. And so, for example, you need to measure how you are dealing with risk as an organization, how you are controlling the cost in terms of what you do, the governance, arrangement, and assurance you've got in place in relation to your cost.
And how do you measure that? Sorry to jump in there, because we know we have to measure it, but how do you measure?
So I've carried out lots of kind of maturity assessment frameworks. So
is it subjective? Is what I'm getting at.
It's there's a science to it. It's obviously, it's not an exact science. It's kind of mostly subjective, but some of the things. So, for example, if you want to find out whether you want to measure how you, as a project control function, you want to find out how you're doing. So, for example, when you are kind of assessing your cost, or you're obtaining your cost, do you do you carry out peer review? So some organizations, they carry out cost estimates and cost controls, and they collect cost data, but there's no, at the basic level, there's no peer review. Do you carry out peer review? So you will have some some of the things you would need at the basic level. So example, is there a project control guidance document within your organizations? If there is, the next level is this guidance followed? What are the tools you use?
Okay.
So for example, in developing your plan at the most basic level, do you just develop your project schedules, without kind of having, critical path methods and things like that? Some organizations will do, but at the other end, you would have organizations that don't, and you will have organizations that actually do, but actually carried out lots of, integrity analysis on their schedules. So there is an hierarchy of kind of maturity. So once you measure where you are as an organization, then you'll be able, as time goes on, you'll be able to find out whether you actually, once you carry out audits, maturity assessments, whether you're actually, meeting your current maturity, and whether you are continuously improving and learning as an organization. And in terms of ultimately trying to quantify it, I guess it's going to be the kind of value added in terms of, are you able to show where there are kind of challenges on projects? Are you able to kind of identify risk? Are you able to kind of mitigate risk? And are you kind of adding value to projects from an organization perspective?
No, great. Thanks for that, Yakubu. And personally, I don't mind a little bit of subjectivity, because there is some merit in it. And this is where psychological Val comes in as well, because you could probably assess a bit of the attitude towards controls, or if you're doing a PMO maturity assessment, to PMO based on the subjective answers to it. Obviously, being controls folk, we do like hard numbers and hard fact, but in place of that, perhaps a subjective answer gives you something different, and maybe that something different holds value as well. But Val, let's bring you back in. What's your definition of controls?
Mine is pretty simple, right? We are trusted partners in performance. So for me, it's really just about being the critical friend. A critical friend to me is someone who can tell you the truth, even if it's going to hurt your feelings. And that's very difficult in this situation. So even under a lot of pressure, I think project controls has value because, one, we have a seat at the table, and two, we touch every piece of the organization. If we're good, right? If we are really thorough project controls, passionate people, we are from the bottom to the top, looking out for every single person's interest, because there's a level of curiosity to our job role and our spec, right? We are curious rather than dictatorial. We're not saying it should be this way. We're saying, well, why can't you do it this way? What's stopping you? So this enabling, I think, power is that if there was an antidote to inhibitors on projects, it would be the sponsorship of further enabling of project controls professionals. That would be my view, Dale. But real quickly, this is a good one because I've been holding out for this, Yakubu. It's a big one. We don't have Machine Gun Martin here today, so I'm filling in a position of the antagonist, so I do apologize in advance. Question, is this an inhibitor or enabler? The methodology of the project? I don't know the answer to this, but I do see that we've had many conversations about critical path method, about various other project methodologies. It could be an enabler. I don't know. It could be an inhibitor, but I would love to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, methodologies. So I like to argue. I argue that having a methodology in itself is not an enabler, or an inhibitor. Is how you actually deploy it as an organization. So my argument is most times we have lots of methodologies, we have lots of things we have to use, but my challenge is, do people actually know how to use these methodologies? So in order to make your methodology an enabler, you've got to have practices, that people understand, that will allow people to be able to kind of implement these methodologies, that people will understand why they are doing stuff, why they are applying some of these methodologies, the reason, so that people don't just kind of apply these methodologies like robots. So methodologies are good. You have to have a methodology in order to be able to kind of manage your project. You have to follow, a prescription, but your prescription is got to be guided by, good practices. I call them good practices in my book. You've got to be able to kind of follow good practices in terms of how does your methodology allow you to manage risk, for example. It's not just about saying identify a risk. How do you identify a risk? What are the good practices that you should be able to do in order to identify a risk? It's not just enough to say develop a project schedule. What are the things you should expect from a good project schedule? What are the things you need to do? It's not just about saying, calculate SPI or CPI. What are the things you need to do? What does he say? How do you apply it? So you need a methodology to guide you, but you need good practices in order to use your methodologies effectively.
Yeah, we have this every week or every Thursday, we send out a debate question on LinkedIn just to see what gets a lot of interest. And this got a lot of interest. Obviously,
Wow.
We must have some empirical data around critical path method. And maybe it is this type of project, use this type of method, gets this type of result. Surely we're compounding that somewhere in some academic library. Ben, help me out, Yakubu.
It's not, your methodology will not enable your success or failure as an organization or on a project. Is how you use your methodology, because most of the projects we know that have failed, they all use methodology. They all use tools, they all use techniques, they all use hand value, they all use all these things, but they still go on and fail, which is my argument that it's not just about those tools, your methodologies, is actually what surrounds it, is, what are the practices, what is the environment, what is the culture, for example, reporting. I talked a lot about reporting, you need to be transparent with your reporting, you need to send your reports to the right people. Your report needs to highlight the right things, and you need to have an open and honest discussion about your report, and you need to build a culture within your project about reporting. So you might have a methodology that says you need to issue this report, once you get to the next stage gate. That's not going to help you, but you need to build a culture within your project that says, that people are not chastised, if something is going wrong on a project, so that everybody is free to be able to highlight issues or report issues on a project. That will give people the confidence that, if there's an issue in relation to my work package, or there's an emerging risk, let me highlight it, and it will bring out visibility to management, to people that are best able to mitigate those results. So it's about the practices and the culture surrounding the use of these methodologies that will kind of, that will inform the success or failure of a project.
I was thinking, and that's a great way to say it. I mean, but isn't a methodology, from my perspective, it's a repeatable, reusable model or approach that you can use at scale for similar types of projects. So it's a bit like road rules, right? We all drive differently. Some of us need to get our L's and our P's. So there's, as you said, there's factors, there's training, there's things that come out of nowhere. We hit things, we have car crashes, but surely everyone gets the road rules. So it's a repeatable, reusable model that we can use across everywhere, except the US. They drive on the wrong side of the road. But you know what I mean?
Kangaroos in Australia as well. We don't have them here.
And we have wombats too, Dale. They're really bad for your car. So I'm just thinking that there must be some, I guess it's the way you think about it or the way you look at it. There must be a part of it that's an inhibitor. Obviously, it does slow us down. Critical path method can be very taxing, especially on mega projects, because there's a lot of detail that's involved, a lot of change control that'd be required. But then on certain types of projects, methodologies are really useful, because if you have nothing, in the absence of nothing, a framework is useful, a model or a jig is useful. It saves you time and effort, and goes back to Dale's point about being a bit more effective. I do have a question about leaders though for you, mate. I think this is probably one of the interesting things about value and value add for project controls in particular. One of the inhibitors for project controls is no one listens, I think. And when we have leaders at the top, I can tell you categorically the number of project controls people I have spoken to, including Dale, who actually knew what was happening on the project, and leaders intently, purposely ignored that information to make another decision that affected the project negatively. Did you find that leadership, if we're going to go back to people and psychology and understanding how projects work, at the factor of it's not the methodology, it's what happens around it, then leadership surely is the cream of the crop when it comes to inhibitors of projects, if they are not really enabling the project?
Absolutely. If I did say, if irrespective of the methodology you have, how good it is, it's got to have management sponsor. It's got to have good leadership. A project control, I did as part of my kind of doctorate ages ago, more than 12 years ago now, I did come across an organization whereby they didn't kind of believe in project controls. They thought they weren't kind of suited to it, that it was too much for what they did. But there was this kind of commercial director that was on the, and it was adamant that project control is something that they had to use within the organization. And I came across this company later on, and the project controls department had grown. That's because they had the right leader. They had someone that kind of valued project controls. So if a project or an organization hasn't got the right leader, no matter what, project controls will not thrive within the organization. So bad leadership is absolutely an inhibitor, not just for project control, but for project management in general. We've all heard of, of projects whereby people highlight, the delivery team kind of highlight issues and challenges to the project, and the information gets buried by the leaders, and ultimately, nothing happens, or bad leadership. So leadership is a key inhibitor. Is also an enabler. So if you've got a good leader, you've got a good leadership on a project, and your project controls tools, your project controls environment, and project controls department has got the right management sponsor, project control culture will thrive within the organization.
So then my follow-on question is really around how important then is organizational design to the effectiveness and the success of the project?
Pardon, could you repeat that?
Organizational design. How important is organizational design to the effectiveness and the success of the project? Because I would imagine that would have some huge impact then, if leadership is probably one of the key points.
Yeah, because organizational design, it affects the resourcing, you allocate to roles, to areas of the areas and functions of the business. So you've got to be able to kind of design your organization appropriately. And one of the things is, project control is not a one-cap-fits-all. You did mention that, about methodology earlier on, about the fact that, methodologies are adapted, irrespective of the type of project. The best organizations out there, are quite picky in aspects of methodology they actually apply. You can't apply methodology, on a blanket basis, irrespective of the type of project you have, irrespective of the type of project you deliver, or the type of organizations you have. So you need to be able to design your project functions carefully. You need to be able to allocate the right resourcing and the right skills on the project, and you need to pick and select, the type of methodology you apply. And most organizations, how they have, when I advise organization, I advise them, you need to kind of have, a hierarchy in terms of the way you apply your organizations and governance. There's no point going with a sledgehammer, on a project that is low value, and, applying all the kind of methodologies and doing lots of sophisticated things. It will become an enabler, because people will be frustrated. People will feel that, the time spent on project controls is not worth the reward on it. So you've got to balance it. You've got to be able to look at what you do, and good leadership and good organizations out there will be able to kind of make that balance and make the right judgment in order to be able to kind of apply the right level of controls on their projects.
Well, this is where it's interesting, because if I look at organizational design at the moment, it reminds me, we still think like small villages. So you imagine a cobblestone path, and you think of all the little villages. You got a blacksmith, and then you got the engineers, and then you got the, the finance people, and they all got their own little houses, and they don't necessarily integrate, because arguably we don't deliver work like that. Villages, it makes sense, but in a project environment, we have cross through paths, because we flow with the information, we flow with the design, we flow with the intent of the project. The project goes horizontal. The program organizational design still looks to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, vertical. So the hierarchy is really about management, not necessarily about delivery. And even in delivery, they have management structures like that. So my question, maybe dichotomy is, we talked about methodology, but which one would be more enabling? So if we move from inhibitors to enablers, would we have more effective, and would be a bigger bang for buck if we change the organization, or if we change the methodology?
I would say is more about the organization design. As I said, I'm a fan of methodology, but at the end of the day, methodologies don't, using methodology in a robotic fashion, don't kind of deliver your project. I think it talks to my point about, the environment surrounding the project. So one of the environment is the way you design your organizations. For example, I did during my research, I did come across the fact that, a number of organizations, project controls normally utilize cost information and time information. But when I actually did my research, I did kind of find out, you usually have the planning department, separated somewhere else. Then you had a kind of cost, kind of commercial department somewhere else, and the two shall never meet. However, when you want to control your project, you actually need this information to talk to each other. So good organizations actually kind of, integrate these two functions, and they align them closely. So even if you've got the best of methodologies and you design your organization poorly, the design of your organization is poor, then you will come across lots of challenges. You need to be able to kind of design your organizations. As I mentioned earlier, project controls interact with lots of other organizations. You need to make that as seamless as possible in order to be able to realize, the benefits of a good project controls function.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's value in obviously understanding the holistic view of the entire project and the intent as well. But look, just the final thoughts for me for a question, and obviously we've gone over time, but what's the biggest inhibitor you've experienced on a project personally?
Oh, the biggest inhibitor are basically, it's got to do with people. It's about kind of communication, it's about communication, people understanding what's happening on the project, people understanding where there are changes, people understanding the processes, where they need to go for things. The biggest inhibitor is basically lack of communication, effective communication on a project. It affects all areas of the organization in terms of being able to plan properly, being able to kind of, control your governance, being able to kind of highlight the risk to organization. If that communication is lacking in a project, then the project will it will spell doom for the project. So communication is one of those kind of key inhibitors to effective delivery of a project.
Do you mean formal comms or do you mean informal comms? When you say comms, do you mean like, I'm going to send you a formal email or an instruction via a transmittal?
No, it's kind of engagement. Formal communication is important, but it's more to do with the engagement of all the stakeholders, of all the key participants in the project, in terms of people being able to share data, people not kind of having a cottage industry to hold information or to hide information, people able to kind of being comfortable to be able to kind of highlight issues, and talk about challenges. It's basically that communication, building that culture of, straightforward, transparent communication on the project is actually an important criteria for project success.
Amazing stuff there. It's great to have a doctor in the house, Val, because we can dissect controls to the nth degree. But as you say, we're coming towards the end of the pod, but I'm going to try and do something different here. I'm going to give you a fun fact. You spoke about driving, and we spoke about potentially hitting kangaroos, or hopefully not. So on Wikipedia, a bull bar or push bumper, also kangaroo bar or roo bar, winch bar or nudge bar in Australia, moose bumper in Canada, livestock stop or kangaroo device in Russia, and push bar, ram bar, brush guard, grill guard, cactus pusher, rammer, pit bar, pit bumper, or cattle pusher in the United States is a device installed on the front of a vehicle to protect its front from collisions. Don't say you don't get anything on the Project Chatter podcast, but I thought that was absolutely fascinating. I never knew it had so many names, but it is appropriate to this topic because controls has many different forms and many different faces. And we need to know, I think, which one to put on, which skill set to use, which tool in the tool belt or tool kit to apply, given the circumstance, given the context. So thank you so much, Dr. Yakubu, for kicking the tires with us on this topic. It's quite an interesting one. I don't think an hour does it justice. So maybe we'll get you back to explore some other avenues we haven't gone down. But before we let you go, we do have a pop quiz, and I know you listen to the podcast, so you know it's coming. And let's go for it if you're ready.
Sure.
Cool. So question 1, steak, seafood, or salad?
Steak.
Question 2, are leaders born or made?
Made.
Interesting. Question 3, what is one piece of advice for people new to project controls?
Understand your project in order to be able to apply the right controls.
Nice. Question 4, if you could go back to one moment in your life, what would it be and why?
Oh, interesting. That's a killer question, isn't it? Right. One moment in my life. I can't think of any.
Oh, wow. Wow.
One moment. I
This
can't think of
podcast.
any that isn't too personal. What to put it.
Well, whatever answer you want to give us, if that's answer, we'll accept. Question 5 then. Which superpower would you choose to have for a day and why?
The ability to flash, the ability to be super fast. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Why not? Why not? I think Val wish he could be super fast back in his MMA fight. But yeah, unfortunately, it wasn't to be.
Close enough. Thanks,
Yakubu,
man.
look, thank you so much for your time. Like we say, it's been a pleasure and an honor and a privilege. Before we let you go, any final thoughts that you want to leave our listeners with?
No, absolutely. It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure to come talk about a topic I love and enjoy so much. So absolutely. In terms of the last kind of words from me in relation to project controls, is basically to say that, irrespective of, your level or what you do on the project, you are part of the whole process. So you shouldn't think project controls is just for a department called project controls. You should be able, you should kind of do your part and play your part as well. If there's an issue, a challenge, or a problem, you should be able to identify it. That goes a long way to kind of support and enable your project to achieve success.
Absolutely. Very, very well put. Val, any final thoughts from you?
No, thanks for your time, Yakubu. Obviously, we can get really into the detail, but I look forward to having you back again and we can go into another facet of project controls. But thanks for having your time here. It's really good.
Thank you very much.
Great. So there you have it, folks. That's all we have for this episode. But remember, before you go, please do help us pay it forward and share a link to this episode on your favorite social media. Once again, a massive thank you to our guest today, Dr. Yakubu Olawale. And thank you all for listening. Till next time, we say stay safe, be disruptive, and have fun doing it. From me and Val, it's bye for now.